March 17, 1943. Rechlin Experimental Airfield, Germany. Hans Vera Leasher's hand trembled as he made the first notation in his logbook. He had just climbed out of the cockpit of an aircraft that contradicted 3 years of Luftwaffe assumptions about Allied industrial power and aerial tactics. The bomber before him, a captured Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress the Germans would call Wolfhound, was not merely another wreck to be scavenged. It was a complete, repairable example of American heavy bomber design, and within its riveted skin lay answers that would reshape German thinking about air war and industrial capacity. 3 months earlier, on December 12, 1942, Lieutenant Paul Flickinger and his crew of the 361st Bombardment Squadron had faced exactly the kind of decision no bomber crew wants to make. On a mission over occupied France, their B-17F, serial 41-24585, nicknamed Wolfhound, was hit hard by Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Focke-Wulf FW-190s. Engines failed, wings bled oil and smoke, and keeping formation meant certain destruction. Flickinger chose survival, a wheels-up landing in a hayfield near Melun, 60 miles southeast of Paris. The 10 men emerged, expecting prisoners of war. They did not expect the value of the intact machine they left behind. Within hours, German soldiers and Luftwaffe ground crews swarmed the field. Where most Allied losses were scattered and ruined, Wolfhound sat whole. Technicians photographed every system, sketched every panel, and guarded the hull against souvenir hunters. 2 days later, after temporary repairs and repainting in German markings, the fortress was ferried under fighter escort to Rechlin, the Luftwaffe's central evaluation and testing facility north of Berlin. From that moment, the aircraft ceased to be property and became intelligence gold. At Rechlin, the bomber entered a specialized world. Teams of engineers, metallurgists, electricians, and test pilots dissected it with the clinical thoroughness of surgeons. They removed access panels, measured skin thickness, analyzed alloys, cataloged rivet patterns, and compared each system to German equivalents. The B-17's construction revealed an industrial philosophy foreign to German practice: standardization, interchangeability, and assembly with jigs and fixtures that allowed semi-skilled labor to produce complex aircraft quickly. Where German designs often relied on hand-fitting and skilled craftsmen, the B-17 showed precision tolerances achieved across thousands of parts. A revelation that, when the numbers were crunched, suggested American production capacities that seemed impossible. On March 17, 1943, Wolfhound finally flew under Luftwaffe control. Flugzeugführer led the maiden evaluation flight, and pilots quickly confirmed what engineers suspected. The fortress handled predictably and stably, even when deliberately crippled for single and twin engine tests. Its redundant systems, stressed skin construction, and self-sealing fuel tanks meant damaged fortresses could, and did, return to England with wounds that would have grounded or destroyed comparable German bombers. The bomber's robustness, more than any single technical spec, explained why so many American crews survived missions that would have doomed their attackers. But it wasn't only the engineering that unsettled German analysts. Rechlin's test program focused relentlessly on the fortress's defensive armament. A B-17F like Wolfhound carried 9 Browning M2.50 caliber machine guns. Later, B-17G models would add a chin turret and increase the total to 13. Each M2 could fire roughly 750 rounds per minute. Collectively, in a fully armed G model, the aircraft could launch on the order of 10,000 rounds per minute. Those figures stop being abstract when you imagine an approaching fighter slicing into a cone of heavy, overlapping fire. Tracers streaking, turrets rotating, waist gunners sweeping the beam. German pilots who later described attacking B-17 formations used words like storm and walls of fire. The psychological effect, Rechlin's observers concluded, was as deadly as the ballistics. To understand how to beat the fortress, Luftwaffe test pilots and tactical analysts reconstructed attacks from the German perspective. Simulated runs were flown in Bf-109s and Fw-190s, while ground cameras and chase planes filmed the approaches. The results were stark. Traditional tactics, high rear attacks or beam passes, walked pilots into concentrated interlocking fields of fire. The tail and dorsal turrets, Sperry-powered and well-protected, covered most rear and over-the-top approaches. Waist gunners and the ball turret defended the lower arcs. Nose guns, particularly after G-model improvements, complicated frontal attacks. Rechlin's detective work did more than catalog weapons. It taught Luftwaffe pilots where not to be. What emerged was a grudging tactical standardization. Frontal attacks, head-on passes from 12-tone high, could minimize exposure by hitting a relatively weak zone in the fortress's defenses. But those attacks demanded extraordinary nerve. Closure rates often exceeded 500 millimeters, and the shooting window for a German pilot could be measured in seconds. The pilot had to dive in, aim at a rapidly expanding mass, fire at near point-blank range, and pull away in time to avoid collision. All while under the bombardment of the bomber's own guns and in the risk of structural damage from return fire. Those who mastered frontal passes scored dramatic successes. Those who failed rarely lived long enough to learn from mistakes. While Rechlin's testing refined tactics, back-office intelligence was doing arithmetic that haunted German strategists. Engineers and analysts estimated American production rates by examining standardized parts, noting interchangeable assemblies, and extrapolating from factory practices. The numbers were staggering. American output of heavy bombers and the scale of industrial support that could sustain worldwide operations far outpaced Germany's heavy bomber production. If the B-17 represented an industrial system optimized for volume, what did that mean months and years down the line? The answer, mass, sustaining production, undermined the Luftwaffe's strategic confidence far more effectively than any single battle. Practical experiments broadened Rechlin's findings. The Germans tested engine performance, supercharger efficiency, and fuel consumption maps. They measured the R-1820 radial's output curve and noted the fortress's cruise and climb capabilities at altitude. The bomber's ability to operate comfortably above 25,000 feet put it where many German cannon and even fighters became less effective. Formation flying trials explained how the Americans held tight boxes in the face of repeated fighter attacks, and separate towing tests in mid-1943 explored other roles. The B-17's power and range made it an attractive candidate for glider towing and clandestine transport, a versatility Germany would try to exploit even as it lacked the broader resources to field such capabilities routinely. The captured fortresses also found a place in deception and special operations. KG-200, the Luftwaffe's secretive special missions wing, operated a motley fleet that included captured Allied types for reconnaissance, insertion, and clandestine strikes. A B-17's range and appearance could, at night, at altitude, or under the right radio protocols, let it slip past Allied controllers for a time. Wolfhound itself was repainted in dusky night shades and coded for special ops service. Records are fragmentary. KG-200's missions were secret and sometimes undocumented. Still, post-war researchers pieced together evidence that several captured fortresses flew missions from late 1943 into 1944, ferrying agents, reconnaissance teams, or odd cargoes across contested skies. Hans Vera Leasher, the test pilot who would become Rechlin's most experienced evaluator of captured aircraft, approached each flight with the cool curiosity of an engineer in a cockpit. A glider-trained pilot with an engineering background, Leasher flew more than 125 types during the war, without a serious crash. He climbed into Wolfhound with no manual, no checklist, and only the instincts and methodical caution of a test pilot. He learned by observation, step-by-step systems checks at altitude, and careful experimentation. The instrument panel itself was a lesson. American designers favored centralized, standardized layouts, circuit breakers instead of fuses, throttle logic and gauges calibrated to imperial units. These small differences translated into broader implications for maintenance, training, and field repairs. The defensive tests at Rechlin revealed both technical and human truths. The ball turret, cramped, exposed, and terrifying to occupy, nevertheless provided near-complete coverage of the lower hemisphere. Waist gunners endured sub-zero altitudes and hurricane winds to sweep beam approaches. Tail gunners, in powered turrets with excellent visibility, could create a lethal trap for pursuing fighters. In one exercise after another, German crews discovered that a determined, well-trained crew, fighting together in a layered formation, could turn a bomber array into a moving fortress. The result, German air strategy had to adapt, not just in hardware, but in doctrine and pilot selection. The numbers the Rechlin team tabulated were blunt instruments of understanding. A B-17G's complement of 13 M250s, firing at 750 rounds per minute, produced a combined theoretical rate of fire measured in the tens of thousands of rounds per minute, a concentrated volume of lead that no single fighter could easily face. Ammunition loads were equally impressive. Thousands of rounds on board each bomber, distributed to tail, waist, dorsal, nose, and ball positions so that defensive fire could be sustained over long missions. Multiply a single bomber's firepower by the three-dimensional combat boxes of 27, 36, or more aircraft, and the attacking pilot faced not a single target but a wall of overlapping fields of fire. These findings were not merely academic. They changed training films, tactical bulletins, and fighter doctrine across Luftwaffe units in the West. They also fed a more dangerous conclusion. Even with perfect tactics, German industry could not match Allied output. The captured fortress had revealed both a technical edge and an industrial model that Germany could not hope to replicate at scale, while fighting on multiple fronts, under strategic bombing, and with dwindling resources and skilled labor. Wolfhound's public moment came at an exhibition in June 1943 at Rechlin Airfield. Alongside captured fortresses, Messerschmitts and Junkers, German commanders saw examples of Allied aircraft, B-24 Liberators, P-47 Thunderbolts, P-38 Lightnings, and even a P-51 Mustang, icons of an industrial system that churned out complex, rugged machines in overwhelming numbers. Observers reported a palpable disquiet. American assemblies fit with a precision German craftsmen admired. The contrast with wartime German production, often rough, jury-rigged, and constrained by bombing and labor shortages, could be seen with a glance. By late 1943 and into 1944, Rechlin and KG-200 had operationalized some of what they learned. Captured fortresses flew clandestine missions, tactical doctrines evolved, and German pilots gained a clearer, if not comforting, picture of what Allied air power meant. Yet, the central lesson of Wolfhound was strategic rather than tactical. The fortress was a mirror that showed how modern war was won, not merely by daring men or brilliant tactics, but by factories producing durable, standardized machines in numbers the enemy could not match. When Hans Vera Leasher closed his logbook on March 17, 1943, he recorded more than flight times and fuel consumption. He recorded the moment German aviation intelligence had to reckon with a new reality. The United States had built a machine that could survive the worst the Luftwaffe could throw at it, and it had done so in a quantity and with a manufacturing philosophy that Germany could not replicate under wartime strain. Wolfhound was no longer just an aircraft. It was evidence, stamped, riveted, and firing, that industrial capacity had become as decisive as any pilot's skill. In the months and years that followed, that evidence shaped tactics, training, and strategic calculations. Rechlin's reports filtered into the hands of commanders and engineers. Luftwaffe fighter pilots altered attack profiles. Special operations units experimented with deception and clandestine missions. Yet the captured fortresses could not reverse the larger tide. The armored confidence of the flying fortress, multiplied across thousands of Allied airframes, proved a structural advantage that tested and eventually overwhelmed the Luftwaffe's ability to defend the Reich. Wolfhound's quiet testimony in a German test field, a battered, repainted bomber flown by German hands, had done something more devastating than any single shot. It exposed an industrial truth that the Luftwaffe could not deny.